That's right, yeah. Let's look at that and revisit that stuff. Can you see it? I see it on the page, yeah.
Hi everyone, and welcome to my portion, the present of college folklore. So, my name is Igor Polotai. I am a third-year history and video game design and development major at the Rochester Institute of Technology in New York. And the past 2 years of my life have been dedicated to chronicling the culture and the folklore of students at my Institute of RIT. Originally, I'm from Ukraine, but now I live in New York, so I'm a local student to the area. And so I started this whole project because I saw that there wasn't a lot of actual documentation of the folklore that existed in my college, and so I decided that I wanted to be the first. And I wanted to create a resource for students in the future who wanted to expand on my work so that they have some kind of baseline. To give you context about my institution, we were started in about 1829 in actual downtown Rochester, New York, founded by some of Rochester's biggest company giants, such as George Eastman, Bosch, Lom, Kodak. Eventually, those companies did go away, but their names are still on our buildings and their influence is still felt on our institution. Eventually, in 1960, New York decided that they wanted to build an interstate highway directly through our campus, and so we had to move outside of Rochester to Henrietta, New York, which is about 20 minutes. But we retained the name Rochester Institute of Technology, even though we're not part of Rochester anymore. Parts of our Rochester campus are still intact. And so Rochester Institute of Technology is a very interesting place because there are two distinct colleges and two distinct sets of folklore and culture that exist there. And with the move, many things shifted. And so a lot of the things from that time period was lost, but has been replaced with modern culture and modern sayings and whatnot. So this is an example of a phenomenon at our institute called soaping the fountain, where some people like to pour soap inside the fountain, causing it to foam up. This promptly then causes the fountain to break and then be shut off for the next 3 months, until the institute thinks that it's time again to try to turn the fountain on. And so, how did I want to approach this? Well, I was building this, as a student for other students, and so I decided I wanted to make this something most accessible to students. And so I decided that I would take my information that I have gathered and condense it into this format, which is called an iceberg. An iceberg is an internet meme where it's essentially an image about a topic, whether it's movies or cities or any topic at all, where it's based on the same tip of an iceberg, where at the very top of the image you have items that are wide known to people knowledgeable about the subject. So for example, if you're making an iceberg about the city of Philadelphia, at the top of the iceberg you probably have the Philadelphia Eagles. Everyone in Philadelphia should probably know who the Philadelphia Eagles are. And so as you go down the list, as you go further into the depths of the iceberg, things get both more obscure in how many people of the population who you are surveying actually know about these things. And in addition, the content matter also gets darker, hence why they're in the more darker parts of the image. And so, you know, up here at the very top, you have some of the most well-known pieces of folklore and urban legends at RIT, such as the tunnel connections. So at Rochester Institute of Technology, we have underground tunnels that connect all of our residential buildings, and we also have a tunnel system that connects all of our academic buildings. And of course, one of the first pieces of folklore that we have is that students are convinced that there's a secret passage that connects these two tunnel systems together, because otherwise you have to walk from one side of campus to the other, and in the wintertime, which in Rochester, New York are pretty brutal, no one likes that. And so the search for the tunnel connection so that RIT students can avoid going outside has been ongoing for many years, and is constantly denied by university officials, but of course, we all probably know that that doesn't actually stop anyone. So how did I do my research? This was a solo project, so this was me trying to gather all of this myself. And so I started by getting a baseline of folklore and knowledge. First book I turned to was reading Simon Bronner's Campus Traditions, and then the Holy Bible within this field. He cataloged college folklore from across hundreds of universities and compiled them within a book. And so I decided that this would be a good piece to read because it would allow me to compare and contrast what RIT had and what it didn't have. Eventually, when I was trying to prepare this panel, I contacted Simon Bronner. He said he was in Oxford during this time, but he told me to contact other people. Those people said to contact other people. Eventually, that's how we got to this panel, chain of recommendations starting from Simon Bronner. Next, I read the history of RIT written by one of our late professors, Dan Gordon, which categorized a ton of RIT history. This was important to get the historical foundation of the Institute, and he provided a lot of behind the scenes on the administrative side of RIT, why administrative decisions were taken, but a lot of student culture was not present in this book. And finally, one of the biggest highlights of my work was I was able to locate and interview the writers of Gracie's Dinner Time Theater, which was a satirical newspaper that was one of the most well-known satirical newspapers, written from 1995 to 2005. I conducted a 2-hour interview with both Sean Hammond and Kelly Gunter, and they also sent me the Big Red Book, which is their best published works. In addition, because I was trying to categorize modern student culture, I turned a lot to social media. RIT has a big Reddit subreddit called r/RIT, or one of the oldest college subreddits, and also one of the largest. And so we have posts there from 15 years ago that have lore and student thoughts categorized and recorded. I also did a lot of interviews with alumni, people who were there in the moment. That's how I got a lot of my information. And eventually I would also get into contact and start working with the RIT archives to see what records they had in student culture and student folklore. And so all of my work got me to get 120 distinct pieces of either obscure history or legends and myths. That has allowed me to record them into 6 broad categories, specifically about folklore. Now, the iceberg is not just a collection of folklore, it's a collection of both also fun facts and obscure history. The goal of it is to see, if you're an RIT student, how many of these 120 items do you know? And so it encompasses a large, wide range of things. But of the pieces that can be considered folklore, I categorize them into 6 main categories. So legends and myths about locations itself, such as our big metal statue called the Sentinel is believed to be able to control the weather by the RIT president, and that's how we always have sunny skies on the very important homecoming weekends or big hockey games. Heroes within RIT or RIT students that have become notable for good or bad reasons. Certain events like Colony Balooza, which was a huge 300 to 500 person party that got out of hand. Certain traditions like the soap fountain we saw earlier, and even sayings that are either written in chalk or graffiti or just written elsewhere around campus. Those also have meaningful history behind them. And breaking it down further, I was asking why specifically do people create folklore within college? And so these are the main 3 reasons I saw. First is that students are uncertain when they come to a college campus. They're leaving behind everything they know and entering a whole new space. And so folklore is a way for them to connect to groups of people, and things like pranks, things like songs, are an example of people trying to connect with each other in this uncertain environment. And connecting with people through tradition is another way that people do it. This is seen a lot in Greek life, or certain clubs where constant traditions or constant legends are said to give shared experiences so that you can feel part of a group. And of course, the everlasting conflict between students and authority and administration is constantly causing struggle, where students rebel, and so we see pranks as well as some really important satirical work that is published so that students have a place where they can voice their frustration. And so that brings us to the question of why does college folklore actually matter? And to that, let me give an analogy. So imagine you were a biologist and you wanted to study genetics. Now, there are lots of ways you can study genetics and evolutions. Perhaps you want to study genetics by looking at how, for example, zebras change over time. Well, you're not likely to live through many zebra populations within your lifetime. So maybe you want to choose something small. Maybe you want to choose, for example, snow peas. Snow peas live and die within weeks, and so very quickly you can live through hundreds of generations of snow peas, and in real time you can see how the genetics of snow peas change. And it goes the same with folklore. If you want to study how the folklore of Native Americans change over time, you're unlikely to live through more than one generation of Native Americans. Now, college campuses, on the other hand, they cycle their entire population within every 4 to 5 years. And so that's important because college campuses are the prime target for seeing the fundamentals of how folklore is actually passed down. You can see how stories are created and how stories are disseminated, and how populations of students pass them down, what stories begin, what stories end, where stories change, why and how. And by studying college folklore, you can better understand just the mechanisms of how folklore is created and passed down. And then you can take those lessons and you can apply them to more bigger communities, such as Native Americans or any community you're researching. It's also important because documenting folklore is just something that preserves pieces of our history. This, for example, has been a long-standing house that has been the origin point of a saying, "Make move, son," that constantly got graffitied on this house, and over time it has evolved. It started as "Make move, son," then evolves to "Make movies, son." Then during COVID, it became "Wash hands, son." So this house has been a very key part of college folklore at RIT. Unfortunately, now it's a pile of rubble. As of 1 month ago, as I was preparing for this conference, they finally took it down, and it has stood for decades. And so, with that being said, this shows why preserving college folklore is important, because it's a very fickle environment. If we don't do stuff to preserve it, next generation, which again happened very quickly, are unlikely to remember it. And so that is what has motivated me to record the histories and folklore I have seen at RIT. So the point of me coming here was to both spread awareness about this project, but also advocate for more research within the fields of college folklore. We have 2 great books in the field, and I want to see more. And as for this project, I'm continuing to work on it. I'm going to be presenting a exhibit based on student work at our big convention at RIT called Imagine RIT. I'll be working with museum studies to build an exhibit. And I'll be also working to archive all of the materials I have gotten so that future RIT historians have a easier time than I did researching this stuff. And so I bring it back to the soap fountain because on the outside it looks like a harmless prank, but deep down we can see that this is a important part of student traditions here at RIT. It's a way for students to connect. It's a way of students to feel like they belong in a place that initially seems overwhelming and potentially unwelcoming. So this QR code will bring you to my Reddit post where I posted the iceberg as well as my Google Doc, which is about 50 pages of all of my sources and all of the information I have gathered over the course of this project. Thank you.